Ever open up a massive federal rulebook and just feel instantly overwhelmed? Like you're trying to decode some ancient, untranslatable language? Yeah, it's pretty intimidating. You see pages upon pages of legal jargon, obscure codes, subclauses, and it's so easy to look at it all as just a giant bureaucratic trap waiting for you to mess up. Well, today, we are completely flip the script on that. In our breakdown today, we're taking a really solid look at federal environmental regulations for hazardous waste facilities, and we're going to reframe the whole thing. Instead of a dense legal maze, I want you to think of this as your ultimate, highly practical safety playbook. It's basically a manual designed to keep you, your team, and your entire neighborhood totally safe. So I want you to consider a pretty wild question. How exactly do you manage the unmanageable? Let's really think about it. How does a massive industrial facility safely handle incredibly dangerous, toxic, or even explosive materials every single day without completely shutting down their business or, causing serious harm to the surrounding community? Honestly, it sounds like an impossible balancing act. But it actually works, and it works through a very deliberate, strict set of rules that guide literally every single action happening on that site. All right, let's jump into the agenda. We've taken this massive regulation and distilled it into 5 super manageable buckets. First, the rulebook. Second, securing daily operations. Third, emergency plans. Fourth, safe closure and finances. And finally, number 5, the cost of noncompliance. Let's do this.
Starting us off with part 1, the rulebook, where we look at understanding your operational boundaries.
Okay, so the specific rules we're talking about today apply to a very unique type of site, known as an interim status facility. Picture this. You're currently in the middle of applying for a super rigorous, permanent federal permit to treat or store dangerous waste. Naturally, that kind of paperwork takes a long time, so while the government is processing everything, you get granted what's called interim status. It's kind of like having a learner's permit for driving, right? You are officially allowed to operate, but you are locked into a very strict set of foundational national standards, just to ensure absolutely nothing goes wrong while you wait for that final green light. Moving right along to part 2, securing daily operations. Basically, the everyday habits that actually keep you safe. You see, safety out there completely relies on these non-negotiable daily habits. Right off the bat, you have to get a unique federal ID number, because the government needs to know exactly who and where you are. From there, it's all about physical routines. We're talking inspecting tanks every single day, testing leak detection alarms, and absolutely making sure that any materials that could violently react with each other are kept far, far apart. Oh, and here's a golden rule. If it isn't documented, it literally didn't happen. You've got to keep a meticulous log of all these inspections, who checked what and exactly when, and hold on to those records for a minimum of 3 years. The main goal, day in and day out, is the active, relentless prevention of any spills or overflows. And this actually brings up a really fascinating distinction between passive and active compliance, routine monitoring versus immediate action. You've got your daily routine, right? Walking the site, checking the gauges, filling out the logbook. But the rulebook specifically demands that if, during that routine walk, you suddenly spot a severe hazard, like, say, a heavily corroded tank or an active dripping leak, you don't just quietly note it down for next week's maintenance meeting. No way. You immediately pivot to action. You have to fix the problem instantly to protect people and the environment. But what do you do when something completely unexpected shows up at your gates? Imagine a truck rolls in packed with hazardous waste, but it doesn't have any of the proper shipping paperwork, often called the manifest. You definitely can't just wave it through, but you also can't just force a dangerous, potentially leaking truck back out onto a public highway. The protocol here is incredibly strict. Step 1, you identify the mystery waste. Step 2, you safely secure it right there on your site. And Step 3, the clock starts. You have exactly 15 days to file a comprehensive report with regional authorities explaining exactly what showed up and where it came from. All right, let's shift gears to Section 3, emergency plans, because we absolutely have to prepare for the worst-case scenario. This introduces the contingency plan. Now, please don't think of this as some dusty old binder sitting forgotten on a manager's shelf. This is a living, breathing fire drill playbook. It's customized specifically for your exact facility, detailing precisely who is in charge and the exact sequence of steps to take if there is a fire, a sudden explosion, or a massive chemical spill. Literally everyone on site needs to know this plan inside and out. So, how does this play out in real life? When an emergency hits, your site's designated emergency coordinator has to execute a step-by-step sequence without a second of hesitation.
First, contain the release so the chemicals don't spread. Second, immediately stop all operations in that specific area so you aren't adding fuel to the fire. Third, notify the local authorities immediately so the surrounding community is warned. And fourth, you have to meticulously clean and restore all safety equipment before operations are ever allowed to start back up.
But here's the catch. An emergency isn't officially over just because you put the fire out. Nope. Federal rules clearly state the incident is not closed until the final paperwork is submitted. You get a strict 15-day window to hand over a detailed written report to your regional authority. You have to lay out exactly what happened, why it went wrong, and how you fully resolved it. Total accountability is a massive pillar of this entire playbook.
Which naturally leads us to Section 4, Safe Closure and Finances. How we prepare for the official end of operations.
Now, you might assume that compliance simply ends the day you lock the front gates for the last time. Not even close. The exact second your facility accepts its final drop of hazardous waste, a very strict federal countdown begins. Let's call that day 0. By day 90, your facility has to have completely treated or removed all the remaining hazardous waste from the site. And by day 180, all your equipment must be totally decontaminated and the full facility closure has to be wrapped up. There is absolutely no dragging your feet here. The government mandates a fast, incredibly safe shutdown.
And for disposal facilities, like a hazardous waste landfill, your responsibility actually stretches out for years after that 180-day mark. They call this the post-closure care period. You're still totally on the hook. You have to monitor the surrounding groundwater to ensure nothing is leaking. You've got to maintain secure perimeter fences to keep curious people out, protect the final layer of soil cover from eroding, and even file legal notices with local zoning boards. That way, 10 years down the line, nobody accidentally builds a subdivision right on top of a closed hazardous waste site.
And here is a really fascinating piece of the puzzle: how this protects the public wallet. Look, the federal government knows that companies sometimes go out of business or declare bankruptcy, right? So to make sure taxpayers don't end up footing the bill for a multi-million-dollar environmental cleanup, the regulation enforces something called financial assurance. You literally have to prove using trust funds, surety bonds, or specific financial stress tests that you have the actual cash on hand to safely close and clean up the site. And you have to prove it before you even open your doors for business.
And let me tell you, the financial stakes are very, very real. To cover any potential accidents that might cause bodily injury or property damage to your neighbors, facilities are legally required to hold hefty liability insurance. The absolute bare minimum requirement for a sudden accidental event is a cool $1 million per occurrence. But wait, it doesn't stop there. You are also mandated to carry an annual aggregate coverage of at least $2 million. This proves to the government that if your daily safety habits fail and a worst-case disaster actually happens, the victims and the surrounding community will absolutely be compensated.
Which brings us directly into our fifth and final section, the cost of non-compliance. Let's talk about what actually happens when you try to cut corners. We're essentially looking at two radically different realities here. On one hand, you've got the total peace of mind that comes with a perfectly compliant, well-run operation. You sleep great at night knowing your team and your community are safe. But on the other side, you're staring down the barrel of federal enforcement. If you start treating these rules as mere suggestions, you aren't just risking a slap on the wrist or a fine. You are risking a total operational nightmare and forced federal shutdowns. In fact, let's look at one of the absolute most severe penalties they have: the imminent hazard action. Put in plain English, this means if the government decides your site poses an immediate, active threat to human health or the environment, they don't have to wait around for a long, drawn-out court date. They have the supreme authority to legally step in and halt your operations right then and there. Game over. So the most important takeaway is knowing exactly what triggers that level of severe enforcement. The absolute fastest ways to ruin your facility's operational status are practically spelled out for you: ignoring visible leaks in your tanks, deciding to skip those mandatory daily walkthroughs, falsifying your financial records to pretend you have cleanup money you really don't, or carelessly mixing wastes that are going to chemically react. These aren't just minor administrative slip-ups, right? They are active, serious threats to safety. As we wrap up our deep dive today, I really hope you can view this federal playbook in a completely new light. These regulations are so much more than just a tedious list of bureaucratic boxes you check to keep the government off your back. They form a deeply integrated, highly active system of protection.
Every single logbook entry, every daily tank inspection, every financial bond, it's all a tangible, real-world commitment to keeping your workplace and your environment safe.
So I want to leave you with a final, slightly provocative thought to take back to your own career. The next time you go to work and stare down your compliance checklists, I challenge you to ask yourself, are your daily tasks just boring paperwork, or are you actively protecting your community? Because once you truly understand the why behind these rules, managing the unmanageable suddenly becomes entirely possible. Thanks so much for exploring this breakdown with me.
If you found this helpful or want to stay updated when this regulation changes, subscribe and support the channel. And if you need the full technical details on this CFR, click the link in the description below. See you next time.